Before this Mishkan was called a Mishkan, it was called the Eisendrath Auditorium, or for short, the Eisendrath. Of course, Rabbi Eisendrath was a person. He was a great person, not a hall. Some of you may even remember him. Some of you have studied his words, pored over them for months and years. Rabbi Eisendrath did great things for Holy Blossom Temple, for the Reform movement, and for the Jewish people. When this Mishkan was the Eisendrath Auditorium, in my time, I remember how the Leo Beck students 20 years ago would call this room the gym. And they would play basketball here, and I remember some of the windows got cracked. If we go back another 40 years on the timeline, you may recall how the temple players used to present plays on the stage that was once here, but is no longer here. And if we go back 20 years before that, you may have heard or read, as I have, that the women of Holy Blossom Temple filled this room with rows and rows of sewing machines to make woolen sweaters and socks for the men serving overseas. And if we go back to 1938, when we first opened these doors, this was considered a perfect ballroom for grand dances with long flowing dresses and men and women spinning on the dance floor, probably right here at the center. Fast forward to today. The new iteration of this Mishkan is outfitted with acoustic paneling on the walls and acoustic buffering under the floorboards. We have screens that come down when it is not Shabbat. We have projectors and Wi-Fi. Our Mishkan is adorned with digitally carved wooden doors here. Extraordinary that a computer had something to do with creating these beautiful carved wooden doors. We have a parochet, which is also digitally fabricated by an original textile artist. And the Ner Tamid above me. This was created by a local glassblower whose name is, appropriately, Blaze. So all these elements come together to create the Mishkan that is a home for our prayers. What you may not realize Shabbat after Shabbat is that these elements were set at the very beginning, right in our Torah portion. Without the riches of technology, there were the riches of their own time, linen and wool woven to perfection and dyed with crimson and blue and purple dyes, precious metals and semi-precious stones. And among all the ingredients, too, there was memory and imagination. All of the components, all of the ingredients came together then as one unified and unifying space. V'shachanti b'tocham, God says, so that I may dwell among the people who gather there. And God says to us the same today. V'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell among you who gather here this day. Among the ingredients for us are also memories of the past and imagination for the Jewish future. Every synagogue today is a miniature of the great temple that stood in Jerusalem. And the temple that stood in Jerusalem, as Rabbi Kay explained, was a so-called permanent and fixed version of the Mishkan, described in our Torah portion. The Mishkan was the portable holy space that the Levites carried and put up and took down, carried, put up, took down throughout the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And some say it was designed as a microcosm of the entire universe. Sometimes a room is for one purpose, and then in time, it becomes something else. A person is like that too. At Torah study this morning, we learned how the rabbis likened the Mishkan to a human body. We are to make of ourselves a sanctuary, each one of us, to construct ourselves to be a dwelling place for the divine. In one stage of our life, we have one purpose, one role, one project, one character. And then with the passing of time, something comes along and we change. Sometimes by choice, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly. We become something else. Our Haftarah describes how with the passing of time, it was time for innovation. It was a time of becoming. 480 years after the people left Egypt, in the 4th year of King Solomon's rule over Israel, in the 2nd month, the month of Ziv, Solomon began to build the temple of the Eternal. And God said, as he was constructing, as he was becoming, God says, concerning this temple that you are now constructing, I tell you this: if you obey my statutes and carry out my rules of justice and take care to keep all of my mitzvot, I will fulfill my promise. Through Solomon's work of constructing, God's promise was able to continue its process of becoming. It seems to me that we are in a time now of becoming. There's a lot of fluidity in the world right now, a lot of possibility, a kind of softening of systems that we once thought were permanent are no longer so permanent. Leadership and other systematic structures seem to be crumbling before us like those earthquakes. The world is forced now to become something new out of necessity, probably in response to the pandemic. We learned during those years to become survivors, to become frontline workers, to become innovators and pivoters, and we did it pretty well. Not perfectly, to be sure, there was a lot of suffering, but we did it. With the vaccine, our confidence is growing, and there is a kind of collective sigh about that. And so we're able to return to our work, to travel, to social gatherings, to services and simchas, but what now? What now will become of us? In this new stage of becoming, individuals are asking, what's next for me? What do I want to make of the years that God will grant me? And synagogues throughout North America are asking, what is next for us? Some are merging. Some are becoming museums. New communities are popping up in formation, and many are laser-focused, like ours, on engaging the unaffiliated, the not yet members, the folks who are part of our crowd but not yet part of our congregation. I attended 2 conferences in the last few weeks, and they were dedicated to innovation and disruption and research and development, because now, exactly now, is the time for becoming. And similarly, our city, this great city of Toronto, is grappling with questions of leadership and infrastructure and social services. What kind of city will Toronto become? What is its next iteration? The world wants to know. And entire countries, like our beloved Israel, are having internal debates about what kind of country they want to become. Now that the 75-year-long experiment has been a success, Baruch Hashem, what now? What will be the law of the land? What will be the Jewish character of the Jewish state? Tonight, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, will address the thousands and thousands of Israelis who will gather in Tel Aviv, as they have every Motzei Shabbat for the last number of weeks, to protest the proposed changes that this hard-right government is pursuing. So times of becoming are for some very exciting, open to possibility, blue sky, blank slate. Some people flourish in times like these. And for others, it's a time of instability, a time of uncertainty and worry. So let me reassure you that while there are times of so-called permanence and times of shifting, when you zoom out the way God can, when we can see through God's creative eyes, we know that it is always this way. There is no permanence. We are in a constant state of becoming. God's very name is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. When Moses says at the burning bush, "Tell me your name," when they ask me, "Who sent you? What do I say?" And God says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I will become what I will yet become. The rabbis describe times like these as a time for pouring new wine into old vessels. It is an act of imagination and also courage. It is an act of respect and an act of commitment. To be ready, willing, and able to pour new wine into old bottles is a sacred act. And I see it happening everywhere now, at every level of society. In the lives of our congregants, I see it at all life stages, young and old, every one of us in a moment of becoming. I see it in our congregational aspirations taking shape, being recast. You're going to be hearing more about that this spring. Cities and countries locked in fierce debates, and Jewish life too. That mission to create something new while drawing inspiration, wisdom, and guidance from the old is our focus now once again. So in conclusion, let me invite you to open up the prayer book to page 149. And you'll see the words you know well, which begins the morning prayers. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, page 149. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. These tents, these rooms, these synagogues, these structures, these are the vessels from the past, old constructions that are strong enough and beautiful enough to contain new wine. And then in the next paragraph, the psalmist says, Va'ani berov chastecha avo vetecha. As for me, O God, abounding in grace, I enter your house. When you walked through the doors of Holy Blossom Temple this morning, did you see yourself entering into God's house to worship here with awe and reverence? This holy place is powerful enough to spark the imagination, to fill us up with the spiritual courage to dream again of what we ought to become. And the third paragraph, the psalmist says, Ani ahavti me'on beitecha. O God, I love this sanctuary. It is the dwelling place of your glory. Humbly here I worship, and humbly here I seek your blessing, for you are my maker. Lifnei Adonai osi. God is the crafter, the former, the shaper, the creator, and we are created b'tselem Elohim. We are created in the image of God, and therefore we also have the tools and the imagination and the drive to create, to construct, to design and craft, to hone and to shape. And finally, Va'ani tefilati lecha Adonai. I offer my prayer to you, O God, at this time of favor. Let this time of becoming be a time of favor for us all. And I'll give you just one hint at how one of the Hasidic masters rereads this verse, Va'ani tefilati. He stops there. He doesn't say, Va'ani tefilati lecha. He says, Va'ani tefilati. He takes out that comma and says, I am my prayer. My lifetime of becoming and then becoming again is my prayer. It is what I have to offer to this world. Aneni be'emet yishecha. Hear us, God. Answer us with truth and with your saving power. This month of Adar is a time for becoming and intensifying our readiness to become again, to reconstruct new realities for ourselves, for the Jewish people, for the wider world we inhabit, and we should do so with curiosity and unafraid. Mishenichnas Adar marbim b'simcha. When the month of Adar enters, we increase and intensify our joy. We increase and intensify our intention to create, to do it joyfully, to do it with some measure of risk-taking. Whatever we may be creating today, whatever is your project for becoming, let it be inspired by our parsha, let it be inspired by these old vessels that are ready to receive new wine. And let it be for sacred purposes. Let it be a collective project whenever possible. Make the personal a shared project so that God will make of our lives, so that God will make of our very lives a dwelling place. Amen.